something quite remarkable is happening to us as individuals and as a society. And that something is that over the 20th century, we who live in the so-called developed nations have added an average of 30 years to our lives. 20 of those since World War II alone. Before I say anything more, that statistic alone raises staggering questions. What does this additional 30 years of living mean for our culture, for our communities, and for us as individuals? For some, it raises the specter of escalating intergenerational tension, or a bleak wasteland marked by personal decline, disease, and diminishment. For others, it evokes stunning possibilities. But whatever your outlook, as one writer says, for most of us, this last third of life is an unknown country for which there is no social map. In the next few minutes, I'll offer some thoughts about how we might approach this new phase of life. And like most explorations into new terrain, this one calls for some wandering, some wondering, and at least a modicum of wisdom. I will spend much of this time considering the spiritual dimensions. But first, I would like to share some more data with you, and I'm hoping these data will just percolate for you as we carry on through the next half hour or so. Most are drawn from our recently published study done by researchers right here at the UVEC Center on Aging. Canadians now have the 4th longest life expectancy of developed nations, at 81 years. At 65, a man can expect to live 17.4 more years, if you're interested in decimal places and such things, and a woman an additional 20.8 years. By 2015, for the first time, Canada will be home to more older adults. Remember, that's just 2 years away. Home to more older adults than to children and youth. By 2036, only 23 years from now, the number of Canadians above 65 will rise from 14% to 25% of our population. In BC, it's expected that number will be 30%. As Larry has just told you, we are a little out of sequence in our series, and I am doing the talk that's directed and targeted to young old age, and later on, actually a month today, Reverend Margaret Harper will be speaking on the older time of old age in a talk entitled Frailties and Farewells. I've already kind of given this away, but I thought we should talk for just a minute or so on some of the ways that people in health policy fields and in geriatrics are beginning to characterize this period of life. And some find it helpful to partition it into 3 stages. The first being the young old that I will be speaking about today. And it actually is an oxymoron, if you're wondering if it is. Young old is an oxymoron. It's generally thought that that would encompass the phase from about 60 to 75. And then those from 75 to 85 would be categorized as old, and those above 85 as the old. While allowing that these subdivisions are at best arbitrary, I think this does help us to acknowledge that this time is not all of a piece. There are genuine differences in health and energy and questions of meaning and purpose across that lengthy spectrum of years. Another way of looking at the aging phase of life was proposed by developmental psychologist Erik Erikson. And he wrote about this and described it early in the 20th century. And he suggested 2 stages to aging. each having their own developmental tasks. And I think that's really important to highlight, that this is a developmental phase. It's not an end. And the first he named as raising a challenge between generativity, productivity, and stagnation. And that would be the earlier time of old age. And the second is the challenge raised of integrity versus despair. And that, of course, comes along potentially later in life. But when all this is said and done, I suggest that we cannot definitively demarcate any stage of life, since they all occur along a continuum. We do, it's true, tend to mark certain birthdays as turning points: 50, 65, 80, 100. But how any one individual experiences these depends on many things: genetics, health, personal philosophy, and the gains and losses that each decade bring for each of us. It is said, for example, that a major personal shock, the death of a loved one, a sudden illness, a job loss, breakdown of any significant relationship, ages us, at least temporarily, if not permanently. So a woman reaching 60 who's just lost a partner will likely experience this time differently than another appointed to a challenging new position at the same chronological age. Similarly, a man of 65 who's just been treated for cancer may see this passage as anything but being young, old. He may feel very old indeed, damaged even, frightened about what lies ahead. Whilst a man of the very same age who's embarking on a round-the-world cruise may feel invigorated and younger than he has in years. Each of us may weave between times of feeling every bit our age and times of renewal and joy and fresh energy. Since our remit today is to reflect upon the stage of aging that spans that young-old time, I will begin with what may free us to be creative and generative, or alternatively, what holds the potential of having us drift into a place of stagnation, as Erickson has said. Later on, we'll consider some of the implications for us in terms of our healthcare system and policies. But first, let's begin in the place of the heart. The hopefulness and legitimacy of aging as being a generative time is well represented in Scripture. In the book of Genesis, God seeks out an aged Abram and Sarai, and this is the story we are told. The Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, "I will make my covenant between me and you, and will make you exceedingly numerous." Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, "As for me, this is my covenant. You shall be the ancestor of a multiple of nations. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the ancestor of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you through these generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you." God said to Abraham, "As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall give rise to nations. Kings of people shall come from her." Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, "Can a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Can Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" And then, of course, we hear something similar in Luke, when an angel brings surprising news to Zechariah and Elizabeth. Zechariah names himself as old and his wife as barren and getting on in years, and yet the angel says to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will name him John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth. This son, of course, is John the Baptist, and the older Elizabeth becomes the guide to her young cousin Mary, who is also about to bear a child. Both stories are wonderful metaphors of the surprises and the unexpected fruitfulness, the responsibility to coming generations, and the new life that can come for us in our aging. And God reminds us of his continuing faithfulness in Isaiah 46. Even he says, to your old age, I am he. Even when you turn gray, I will carry you. I have made and will bear you. I will carry and will save you. One of the critical points in this journey into old age I will propose to you is the transition from midlife to the young old. And I will suggest this is a time to move slowly, to take some time out, to push the pause button a bit, and do some spiritual wandering. I know this is countercultural. How many times have each of us heard someone newly retired say, I'm so busy, I can't imagine how I ever managed to fit work in. I suggest instead that retirement, or this phase of life, which marks the first stage of our aging, invites us to reflect for a while, rather than plunging headfirst into every activity that presents itself. This wandering may take the form of contemplating the twists and turns and punctuation points in our own lives. One writer describes this as consciously unraveling an old, messy skein of yarn, pausing when necessary to patiently work out the tangles and the knots. Symbols for those parts of our lives that confused us, those times when we suffered, those times when we did harm to ourselves or to others. And we all have those times. This can also be a meaningful exercise in letting go of old wounds, of seeking forgiveness, and perhaps of envisaging old events in our life in new ways. It can also be a delightful exercise in reclaiming parts of ourselves long buried. The playful child who loved music or sports or painting. Erickson proposed just such a fallow time for young people. He called this a moratorium, a time in which youth put off commitment while they worked on shaping their new adult identity. Today, we might call that a gap year, often a time of travel, of service, and of searching. Cultural anthropologist Mary Catherine Bateson, who's the daughter of Margaret Mead, suggests that in young old age, a time she calls adulthood too, so there's another way of describing it, that we do something similar, traveling inwardly and outwardly. She suggests that this phase requires a rethinking of who we are and how we want to use this time in our lives, when we're likely to still have reasonable reserves of health and energy. But such a contemplative stance towards life requires commitment, patience, effort, and time. It is about growing old, about being intentional about what new life we wish to claim for ourselves, what contributions we still have to make, what new roles may still await and challenge us. Bateson would have us take this moratorium time to do three things: to affirm our own death, to affirm love given and received, and to affirm our own life. On this Ash Wednesday, this sounds awfully like a Lenten practice to me. If we are ever to do it, this translation into old age is also a time to allow ourselves to be disillusioned. This may sound harsh or bleak, but if we think of it as letting go of illusions, of letting go of images of who we are meant to be and images of how we expect the world to be, then we may well emerge fierce with a new sense of reality, with some of the scales falling from our eyes. These are all spiritual tasks, which at their root say our God-given life at every stage has value and purpose and direction, and that if we only take time to plumb our own experience and our own sense of meaning, we will emerge not as those frenetically busy elders, but as people alive to the world's possibilities, able to see our potential in ourselves, more importantly perhaps in others, to give birth to new life and to recommit to the future of our lives, our families, and our communities. It's if we don't engage these spiritual challenges, I would say, that we risk becoming isolated, disconnected, and stagnant. In other words, we have choices to make about being productive and creative in this new phase, or we can become curmudgeons, or cynics, or a new and rather nasty phrase that's emerging, greedy geezers. Have you heard of greedy geezers? Or simply too self-involved. Just parenthetically, that phrase, greedy geezers, started to be written about around the time of the 2008 election in the United States. And it came about after the AARP, the American Association for Retired Persons, came out in support of health care for all Americans. Within a matter of weeks, 60,000 older Americans revoked their membership in AARP. They saw an entitlement to health care, to Medicare, as being for them, but they could not see it as being for others. To finish on this piece on wandering, I'd like to read you a little bit from a book called A Time to Live, 7 Steps to Creative Aging. It's written by a retired pastor and retreat leader, Robert Raines. Here's what he says. There is in us a deep yearning for the later years to be significant, filled with personal growth, intellectual stimulation, and continuing contribution to family and society. Perhaps that's why it's my tendency to fill my cup quickly, more or less with anything, so that I will not feel the pain of emptiness or the fear of non-being. I am impatient of satisfaction, though in these later years I am able to tolerate a little waiting, letting choices mature, allowing things to unfold, less often rushing to a decision, and even sometimes refusing to decide now. Maybe now is a good time to let the cup stay empty a while. Suffer the pangs of uncertainty and lack of closure. Maybe now is a time to refuse, resist, fast, pare down, edit our life, shed no longer needed things and obsolete attitudes. Activate the no's in order to clear the way for yeses waiting in the wings. It's okay to resign from this committee or that obligation. We've been on plenty of committees and fulfilled lots of duties. We don't need to justify or explain ourselves anymore. We are old enough to choose how we want to spend our time and serve our community without fear of social disapproval or economic reprisal. It's time to pay attention to our thirst and seek what could water our dry soul. Quality matters now, not quantity. If we have gulped down experiences and years, it's time now to learn how to savor each day's gift, to look and really see, to listen and really hear. We can allow ourselves to be more sensuous, more earthy, more present to pleasure as well as pain. And that brings us to the next element of aging that we're talking about and working with today, and that is wondering. I think this has two parts to it. The first is about curiosity. It's about asking searching questions rather than having all the answers. Just posing to ourselves the question, I wonder what the next part of my life is meant to be about, can divert us from that frantic searching and move us to the stance of a calm observer, ready to listen and watch. There is probably no character trait that can lead us into a larger sense of life than this curiosity. To look at a newborn grandchild and to wonder at what life holds for him, or what gifts she will bring, what family traits she will exhibit, or in what ways he will be an absolutely unique person, different from anyone else you've ever known. Then there's the other side of the wondering coin, being awake to the ways in which life can be utterly magical and beautiful, mysterious and disturbing. Religious writer Greta Vosper calls this reverence, and names it as a position we take in relation to those great things that inspire, edify, challenge, condemn, and rearrange our world views. Those are powerful words. Condemn and rearrange our world views. I suspect this capacity for wonder and reverence is absolutely vital to aging well. Letting our worldviews be rearranged is the diametric opposite of letting our attitudes and beliefs become ossified, settled, frozen. And it takes openness and courage to consider new ways of being and of understanding our world and our place in it. Wonder also invites us to be playful and self-forgetful. I can't think of a better antidote to what French writer Marie de Hanzel calls the potential for monstrous narcissism in old age, where we risk, she says, being constantly preoccupied with ourselves and our own sacred maintenance. If we obsessively try to prolong our youth, we will divert ourselves from the essence of this time and in the process fail in our task of preparing ourselves for old age and death. Sister Emmanuel, a nun in her late 90s, said, "Whatever the state in which one grows old, one can always look, smile, stretch out one's hand, and bless, and that transfigures life." So there's another good question. What holds the potential to transfigure us? What rebirths are possible for us now? And this is an integral part of allowing a new life to be constructed in us, of allowing ourselves to outgrow old patterns and ways of thinking. There's a paraphrase of Carl Jung that says, "The morning's truth will be the evening's error." That's the risk, the stagnation risk. Wondering allows us to retain and cherish our eros energy, inviting us to stop looking at ourselves in the mirror, instead directing our energy outward toward experiences that are soul-making, gazing at the setting sun, our starry sky, marveling at an affectionate gesture between two people who love each other, being intoxicated by a jazz concert or a Bach chorale. Listen to how Yeats writes about such a moment. "My 50th year has come and gone. I sat, a solitary man, in a crowded London shop, an open book and an empty cup on the marble tabletop. While on the shop and street I gazed, my body of a sudden blazed, and 20 minutes more or less it seemed so great my happiness that I was blessed and could bless." So perhaps wandering and wondering each have a place in mindful, fruitful aging. But what about wisdom? I confess I find this the stickiest of the wickets. In part because I find it hard to define and even harder to consider as something we can acquire, kind of a merit badge for oldsters. It's been pointed out to me that it's unreasonable to consider it to be the purview only of the old. For example, what about the wisdom of children and youth, the young ones we intuitively call old souls? Here's how the feminine Sophia wisdom is described in the Wisdom of Solomon. There is in her a spirit that is intelligent, holy, unique, manifold, subtle, mobile, clear, unpolluted, distinct, invulnerable, loving the good, keen, irresistible, beneficent, humane, steadfast, sure, free from anxiety, all-powerful, overseeing all, and penetrating through all spirits that are intelligent, pure, and altogether subtle. And later, in the same book, in every generation, wisdom passes into holy souls and makes them friends of God and prophets. For God loves nothing so much as the person who lives with wisdom. And then there's a secular definition that I personally find more helpful than anything I've found in a dictionary. It comes from Betty Friedan, who was one of the leaders of the women's movement in the U.S. She calls wisdom the ability to see the picture whole and its meaning deep and to tell it true. To see the picture whole and its meaning deep and to tell it true. And the anthropologist Catherine Bateson helps by saying that it is not simply an accumulation of information or experiences. It's the fruit of continuing reflection on encounters, a skill at drawing connections and finding similarities, looking for underlying patterns rather than a possession. It's not about having wisdom. And French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, in an interview he gave at age 90, said he most feared the boredom and apathy that can be part of aging, and suggested that the remedy is to be attentive and open to everything new that happens. Remain capable, he said, of what Descartes calls admiration. To me, he said, this is the wisdom of old age. So again, this returns us to a place of meditative stillness, needing to create space for such awarenesses. But I'm going to contend that there's also a shadow side in attaching wisdom to aging. It can lead to a marginalizing of the old. It can do this by playing into what we call the disengagement theory of aging, which holds that as we advance in years, we should withdraw from active involvement in life to a place of calm and peace and transcendence. Now, truly, this can arise from a well-meaning and benign hope that older people can and should rest on their laurels. But it can also be a way of sidelining this increasingly large segment of our society from the mainstream and a form of ageism. It can lead to an unhealthy suppression of emotions, most particularly the prohibition of righteous anger that may lead many in their aging to a heightened involvement in matters of social justice. Think the raging grannies, for example. Václav Havel, the Czech politician and poet, said that as he aged, he felt something like a social emotion, an antagonism toward undeserved privilege, toward unjust social barriers, toward any king or so-called higher standing predetermined by birth or by anything else, toward any humiliation of human dignity. This passion for justice can be a legitimate and galvanizing force in us as we age. And come to think of it, it's perhaps a kind of wisdom too. What are some of the hallmarks of psychologically and spiritually aging well? I would suggest that they include acquiring the contemplative approach to life we've been talking about. I would suggest that that is vital not just for ourselves but for others. Self-acceptance and the capacity to be less bound by judgments of ourselves or others allows us a freedom which is very attractive to others and may actually be a more genuine reflection of wisdom than any words might be. Most of us have had an older person in our lives we just love to be with. And it has a lot to do with an attitude of enthusiasm for life, with playfulness and a lightness of being. And especially an attitude of loving acceptance. It's also important, I think, to be very intentional about maintaining or growing relationships across all ages, while at the same time not expecting younger people or family members to meet all our social needs. It may also mean, especially for the young old, finding new work or becoming absorbed in learning or volunteering or involving ourselves in matters of social justice. All ways of continuing to participate in life, but with perhaps more of an eye on what legacy we would like to leave and a different, more self-reflective and balanced perspective on our efforts. I would also suggest this is a time for recognizing the unfulfilled parts of ourselves and for trying new things. A friend of mine who just died in his mid-90s, whom I still saw as young old, took a weekly Italian lesson, even though he was legally blind. He always loved words and language, and he loved this new challenge. There is also a huge place in this time of life for playfulness and humor. After all, Abraham and Sarah named this unexpected child and gift of their old age, Isaac, which means he laughs or laughter. But there is also the reality of limits that loom larger as the years go by, as our joints creak and our memory grows a trifle unpredictable, and as chronic illness or illnesses may arrive to plague us. The psalmist prays, "Teach us to count our days, that we may gain a wise heart." This sense of the approaching end of our lives need not make us morbid or fearful, but it can keep us real, keep us moving, keep us grateful. We need to become more resilient in order to find approaches and adaptations that maximize our capacity to make a contribution and to still enjoy and find the wonder in life. So now, in a slightly tricky segue, I'm going to move from these spiritual aspects of aging and spend a few minutes before closing on issues of healthy and not so healthy aging. Some health policy experts fear that the burgeoning population of those over 65 will burden society and skew budget allocations in ways unimaginable in the past, as more and more boomers require, even demand, more and more of the system. And there is already some evidence for this. Joint replacement surgeries in Canada are rising at a rate of 10% a year. Each one of them costs the system about $12,000. And those joint replacement surgeries, which used to be confined to hips and knees, are now expanding to shoulders and elbows and ankles. And then a new wave comes along, and that's the wave of redo joint replacements for those whose first joint replacements have now worn out. And these carry even higher costs. And all of this, not to mention cardiac procedures, care of chronic diseases such as congestive heart failure and arthritis, and the growing epidemics of diabetes and obesity challenge the system. Some argue that as fewer remain in the workforce and more need to avail themselves of so-called entitlement programs, health care, old age security, pension plans, intergenerational warfare may erupt. In BC, which is one of the fastest growing senior populations, people over 65 currently make up 14% of the overall population, but they use 33% of physician services, 48% of acute care, 49% of pharmacare expenditures, 74% of home and community care services, and 93% of residential care. As these costs escalate, what will this mean for other equally vital programs? Childcare, education, investment in infrastructure, just to name a few. Others, however, see the picture as much less bleak. Today's older people are healthier and more active than past generations. Systems currently under development to provide more seamless and streamlined chronic disease care will benefit younger people with these diagnoses, not only the old. And something else is being observed called the compression of disability, meaning that with the new innovations in care and pharmacy, the disabling impact of chronic disease is now experienced over a shorter, compressed span of time. Pope Benedict, who made news this week by resigning at age 85, nearly 86, said in a speech to an audience of seniors in November 2012, the quality of a society, I'd say of a civilization, is judged by how well it treats its elderly. There is, I would suggest, a need for some soul-searching on the part of those growing older and of the society in general about how we can humanize our world, not solely for the benefit of one age group, but for all. And rather than being perceived or perceiving ourselves as entitled, there is much we can each do that will enhance the quality of life we enjoy and reduce the demands we place on others. They may sound like cliches, but perhaps we just don't take them seriously enough. Being active, eating a healthy diet, maintaining a healthy weight, searching out more happiness and joy, and finding less to stress ourselves about. This is one central question that health policy experts are looking at now, and that is how to help people become more effective agents in addressing their own health needs. Of course, not all illness is by any means preventable, and it is sad but true that some people just have more than their fair share of health issues. A study on aging in Ontario showed that 10% of older Ontarians account for nearly 60% of the spending on seniors, while the healthiest 50% only account for 6%. So half of the aging population is using a tiny fraction of the total healthcare budget for older people. Both primary and secondary prevention can help to contain health costs while also improving the quality and length of life and productivity for individuals and families. Much research is being done at reducing the impact of age-related disease. Another thing we can all do is to complete advance directives indicating the kind of care we would want to receive as we near the end of our lives, providing relief and guidance for our families and a way to keep our dignity and ensure that our preferences can be honored. Some may want everything possible done, but others may choose simple comfort care. And perhaps most importantly of all, I think, faith communities and individuals can play a significant role in advocating for equitable access to health care, something we are not always seeing at the moment. Though there are bright spots, the poor among Canada's elderly, particularly older women, do not usually experience the same access to care as wealthier seniors. And in Canada, where healthcare spending is predominantly managed by provinces, there are also more and more inequities emerging in the access and cost of necessary medications. One study in the Globe and Mail in April of 2011 said that patients facing cancer or rheumatoid arthritis diagnoses would pay nothing for their medications in the Northwest Territories. $1,500 in Quebec, $8,000 in Ontario, and $20,000 in PEI. In the UK, at least, where this has been studied, older people in general are less likely to be referred to cardiac rehabilitation and less likely to receive secondary prevention drugs after a stroke. Studies also show that the management of hypertension over the last 20 years has been largely done through medications, with little evidence that proven prevention strategies are being used by the people who have this condition. Things like lowering sodium intake, exercise, moderate weight loss, we're talking maybe 10 pounds, moderating alcohol intake, and trying to reduce stress. So it seems to me that those of us considered among the young, old, and beyond are called to many things: to deepen our experience of wonder and of the holy, to live our days fully, to be good stewards of our own health, to advocate for an equitable distribution of resources for all, including those both older and younger than ourselves, and to do our part in mitigating the social costs of poverty, isolation, and loneliness. In other words, to live all our days fruitfully and faithfully. I close now with words that Rabbi, civil rights advocate, and theologian Abraham Joshua Heschel spoke in 1961 at the first White House Conference on Aging. He began by lamenting the stereotyping of the old, and then he called for a new vision using these words: "The years of old age may enable us to attain the high values we failed to sense, the insights we have missed, the wisdom we ignored. They are indeed formative years, rich in possibilities to unlearn the follies of a lifetime, to see through inbred self-deceptions, to deepen understanding and compassion, to widen the horizon of honesty, to refine the sense of fairness." May it be so. Thank you.